Do I look right? Does my hair look right?
You look fine.
Okay.
You look fine. All right, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Blend Blazers podcast with your host, Ricardo Rice. And today we're going to talk about that D&I space that is becoming the new thing. It should have always been a thing, but now it's a new thing. Plus, we're adding equity to it because that seems to be the new word ringing from the mountaintops. So, you know me, I love to go get somebody that talks about this stuff. So, today I want to introduce Dr. Pia Scott. Welcome, ma'am, to the show.
Thank you.
Such an honor to have you in the studio. All right, so introduce yourself to the people. Tell them about you.
Yes. So I am Dr. Pia L. Scott. I am the founder and CEO of the Pia L. Scott Group. We focus on the 3 C's: counseling, coaching, and consulting as well. So I do a lot.
Okay, what's this lot? We will talk to the people. Come on, Dr. Scott, talk to the people.
So with our counseling, we focus on mental health. With coaching, we do a lot of individual coaching for those who may not be sure what they want to do in terms of transitioning from one career to the next. They may not know, okay, which direction, what soft skills or transitional skills that I can bring to another space. Sometimes we feel like we're stuck in one space and we have so many talents, but we put ourselves in this box. Or you have people tell you, oh, well, that's going to take you forever to do. But don't think about the time, just do it. When you're in it, you see how we're already in March. And this new year.
Please don't get me started. Today's like, what, the 2nd or the 3rd? I was like, today's already the 2nd. I literally turned around and it was January 1st. And we have shot to, this is one of those speed years.
Yeah.
This is one of those speed years, so you better stop playing. You don't have time.
And then also with the consulting, we do a lot of grant writing.
God bless you.
Yeah, I know.
God bless you. I took a grant writing class with Grant Writing USA. That was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't even look at it.
It's intense. It's intense. But, we help a lot of organizations, especially in the mental health field, the diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we help train people to become who they want to become, especially in their profession. We also focus on the mental health aspect. When we talk about affordability as well, too, some people who I have some clients who actually work a full-time job but still can't afford the mental health services. So even with those grants, we're able to offer free services to individuals that are working in the community as well, too.
All right. So let's start off. Let's kick it off with this D&I space. I'm going to ask you about this coaching thing. Coaching is kind of one of those terms you hear, but you're just like, when I think of coaching, I think like a basketball coach.
Right.
Like, how does coaching look? What does it feel like? Like, is it somebody that you call them on the phone, you're just like, hey, get up today. You got to do such and such. Is that what we're talking about when we talk about coaching?
So when we talk about coaching, we have different types of coaching, right? So what we do specifically is we help individuals who are trying to navigate the workplace, the workforce space. When we talk about resumes look different for different organizations. I didn't find that out until I started, working in higher education. I have a background in vocational rehabilitation as well, too. So serving veterans, individuals with disabilities.
You're a one-stop shop. You're a one-stop shop over here.
Your youth as well, ages 18 to 24, who may never have written a resume in their life. So coaching them and showing them, okay, in this particular field, this might be how a resume would look compared to your entry level. So we help individuals understand specifically what that looks like and how to create their own. When you gain a new skill, that needs to go on the resume if it is related to that particular job or career that you're going for. So, you can be a CNA, and I'll use this as an example, but once you get that LPN, that RN, you now are in a completely different space. So your resume should look different. Your experiences should look different from when you first started out. So just helping people even in corporate as well, too. You have some corporate individuals who are transitioning, and then you have some people who are completely transitioning into a different field altogether. So you might have someone who is in nursing and now they want to be in mental health. What does that look like? So we help individuals map out exactly what they need to do and what that looks like for them.
Okay. So when we talk about the workplace, like actually let's stay in the resume space.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the misnomers that people come to you about resumes? Just some myths that they have that are not actually true, or thoughts that we have that are not true about resumes. Cover letters.
Yes.
Let's start there. How vital are cover? I'm not gonna lie, I don't do cover letters. And when they ask,
I
I just kind of snarl. When they ask like, why do you need? My whole resume has everything on it. Why do you need a cover letter? Like, let's start there.
Yeah, and so typically when you have organizations or departments trying to fill a position, and they have maybe like 1,400 applications.
Oh, so it's because they're lazy. It's because they're lazy, or time consumed, and
they want to see, okay, are they taking the time to really? Are you really interested in this position? That's what they want to know.
You would pull that. Dog, you would pull that.
But
Okay, well, I guess that makes sense. I guess that makes sense.
And to further tell me about yourself, first impressions, right? We always talk about giving that first impression, and we're judgmental. We judge, based off what we see,
Maybe a little bit.
what we hear, and so I need to see. Okay, when I'm looking for an applicant, I need to see not only on that paper, but also preparing them for interviews as well too. I work with a lot of college students, and when you tell them, okay, this is the expectation, it's almost as if they're like, well, no, I'm going to do it this way. Okay. But I'm not hearing anything back. I'm not getting any. Okay, well, let's look at your resume. You have a resume. You haven't even talked about what you've done in a job. You just have things listed. The way that you have your resume aligned on that document, they're going to think that, okay, this person didn't even take time to do their resume.
So it's a test and a test.
So
it's a test and a test. Dog, you got me good on that one. I thought about sure I'd be able to wiggle my way out of these cover letters, and you got me about it.
No.
All right, so what should a cover letter, the layout be? Should it be like bullet points of highlighted areas, or should it be like paragraphs just talking about it? What should it actually look like?
It can be a combination of things. So it can be typically your first paragraph is talking about the job. So for instance, I'm applying for whatever position at whatever organization. I have this many years of experience in doing X, Y, and Z, and I was interested in this position because of X, Y, and Z. And then in your second paragraph, you can either bullet it, or you can talk about the things that you've done in that particular field, or a field that's similar. Customer service, we've all pretty much been in customer service before. So if you're working with people, you talk about that. Like, what have I done that I can bring to this position right now? And so you talk about how many years, you talk about your experience, you talk about any things that you have worked with in terms of numbers. They want to see the quantitative data. Have you worked with data? Have you worked with money? The qualitative data. How are your relationships with your team members? Can you work independently? They want to know those things. And by you writing that on that cover letter, they can say, okay, I can see. It's almost like a story, like a short story of what you've done in that particular field. And sometimes you have industries that don't need cover letters.
Yeah, those are the ones I usually apply to. I'm not gonna lie. Those are the ones I apply to that don't require a cover. That don't require a cover letter.
It can be time consuming. It definitely can be time consuming.
It is time. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
It is time consuming.
It's a skill.
Because it's supposed to be. It has to be different for every place you're applying, correct? Because it's supposed to be specific to that particular position. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's not possibly. It's time consuming.
It's time consuming. Yes. Let's just call it what it is.
Like, come on, Dr. Scott. Now work with me. It's time consuming. Let's be very clear about it. It's time consuming.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, but the recommendations is that you should have. Is there like a generic one that you could start with that you can kind of fix?
Yeah.
For every job, whatever. Yeah.
So I typically tell my students, if you want a generic one, you might have to tweak it. Go in and tweak it, because I've seen some students, they'll have the resume and they'll send it, or the cover letter, and they'll send it, but they didn't change.
Oh God, that's
like the position.
Now you look lazy. So that's now you look lazy. That's.
Did you even read what you said?
Yeah, that's
so
unacceptable.
It's
unacceptable.
Yeah. So,
all right.
Yeah.
So the resume itself, some things that you notice when you get your people, young and old. What are some of the bad things that you notice immediately from resumes that you get or you read?
format, content, misspellings, or they will say, like how there's there and there.
Oh yeah, those.
The THERE versus the THEIR. Those little things, I see a lot of that. So, and I don't think it's intentional, but I think some people, like, we're typing, and in this day and age when we're using abbreviations.
Oh my God, the swipe writing stuff.
Yeah. So it's just about really taking your time and even getting another pair of eyes to look, hey, read over this and see, if I missed anything or if there are any misspellings. Formatting is a big deal as well too. References available upon request, that does not go on the resume anymore.
I'm glad you brought it up, because when you apply for jobs to a lot of their websites, some of them ask for recommendations, but it's not as popular as it used to be. Is there a particular reason? Or it just went away?
It just went away.
Probably because people's getting their cousins and uncles and stuff, calling them to deal doing a fresh fry, and it's like, okay, well, we called to ask you about a reference, but okay, never mind. Clearly, this is not a professional reference. So, okay, I'm glad you brought it up. That was a good thing.
Yeah.
Do you recommend the objective at the top?
Yes.
Is that still a thing?
Mm-hmm. That is still a thing, or the summary. And some people do it in bullet points. And once again, it just depends on the organization. Like, for instance, I was in higher education for a long time, and when I first started submitting for those positions, I only had like this one page, and it really wasn't geared toward that. And then once I started learning, okay, let me Google what that looks like. Google can be your friend.
I'm trying Google University. I'm telling you, it's a thing.
So I looked and was like, oh, I've been doing this wrong the whole time. So when I revamped it and I put those summaries of what did you specifically do, I did this, I did this, I did this. And I changed that whole thing, and I started getting calls back like that.
So we're in a specific industry space now where you need to be very specific about what you do.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also looking at the job description helps as well, too. So if you need to pull things out that you've done, and there might be a platform or a system that you've used. I know in higher ed, you use a lot of Handshake. We use a lot of, and what that system is, you can track how many students that you see. You can, visually see how many students you've worked with resumes, interviewing, just different things. You can plug students into opportunities for internships and different things like that. So you really can keep track. I kept track of that data. So now I can say I've worked with this many students doing X, Y, and Z. So you have to be they want specifics. They just don't want you to say cash handling. Anybody can handle cash. What exactly did you do?
Okay, using that same example, what should they have typed instead of saying the cash handler? What would look better? What would sound better?
What would sound better is if they say, during my day-to-day, I worked with different customers doing different transactions and the amount of whatever for the day. So you're still being very specific. I work with this many customers, and I work with this amount of money during the day. I manage this amount of money during the day. So you're being specific. I work with customers. So now I know you work in customer service. You work with customers. And, you can go even as further to say I've, handled customer complaints and different things like that. I've resolved customer complaints by doing X, Y, and Z. Managing this amount of money on my shift from this time to this time, or, put in 40 hours a week doing whatever it was. So you're being very specific as to being vague about cash handling. And I'm not saying that everybody can handle cash. Maybe
God,
I
no.
need to take that back. But
so if it's not your strong suit, you don't even use it. Just bypass it. Don't even put it on there if it's not something you're good at. Because if I find out you steal, you just wasted my paperwork and my time. So don't be slick. Just don't be slick. We're not saying that. Don't be slick.
But just using, being very specific about what you do.
Okay. All right. So that's resumes. You done took this a whole different direction, but I'm thinking about the clips I can use. I'm like, this is very good because, technically we're still at the beginning of the year. And some people feel like their resume is good and it's actually not. So these are tidbits that definitely can help people, because I don't like cover letters. But after this conversation today, I'm like, okay, well, maybe I should stop being lazy and create a cover letter so I can send it in and, probably get some jobs. So, yeah, for all of you like me who are lazy, you should do a cover letter now. Dr. Scott has taught us you should really do a cover letter. So if nobody learned anything, I learned something today about cover letters. All right, so let's shift to mental health, diversity, and inclusion.
Yeah.
What does that look like? What does that feel like? Like, what is that supposed to be? Because we already struggle with mental health, period.
Right.
Just getting it to not be a taboo situation, particularly our community. So what does that look like, diversity and inclusion in mental health? What does that look like?
So when we talk about DEI and when we talk about diversity and mental health, right now in that space, there are a lack of people of color as providers. So that's, the first thing. And studies show that an individual who's looking for a provider most likely wants somebody who looks like them, right? We understand, we have a better understanding of what a person might experience as being a person of color or being a woman or being a man. It just depends on what the individual is looking for. So when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in that space, we start with providers. Then we start with access. So do we have access to those services as well? When I was talking about, I know people of color that I work with, access is huge. The financial piece is huge. So when you talk about equity, yeah, we talk about diversity, and equity, but also even being inclusive. Like, what does that look like in a space? Being in including those individuals as well too in the space as providers, as people who are able to go out into the community. All of that takes money. It takes funding to keep those things going. When you talk about, providers being able to reach people who might be in rural areas, who don't have a lot of access as well too. What about transportation? There's so many different things when we talk about the DEI space and when we talk about mental health that are lacking. There's a huge gap right now. And statistics show that 25% of African Americans don't seek mental health services, or as compared to 40% of white counterparts. So not only do we have the stigma, as you mentioned, we have the lack of care, we have the lack of resources, lack of access, and lack of providers. And when you're talking about Black men, that's even less.
Yeah, it's probably 10%.
That's even less. So, when you have little Black boys and you have Black children, when we talk about that as well too, providers for children. There's a lack of that as well too. Right here in the state of Georgia, I was talking with some individuals the other day, and they said that the suicide for children in the state of Georgia has gone up by 200%.
What?
So yes, it is. It's a crisis. So there's a lot of things that when we talk about that space, we talk about what does that look like. And what are some of the services that we can provide where we can reach, those individuals as well? So it's a lot going on.
So is that something that's considered? Because that's what we were just talking about in the last session.
Right.
The fact there's one guidance counselor to like every 400 and something kids, which I thought was absolutely obscene. And I'm like, so what exactly is our objective? Because it's clearly not to make sure every child is good or in a good headspace.
Right.
So is that something we should be having conversation about as it pertains to wraparound services? Should that be something that's definitely included, just like food and make sure they have a roof over their head?
Right.
So is that...
Yeah, pretty much. And when you talk about wraparound services as well, that takes funding. That takes, providers actually being able to go out into the community as well too. So what does that look like? And with everything that's going on, you have people who may not want to take that on for, fear of something happening as well. So for their safety, with a lot of just different things that are going on in the world now. So when you talk about wraparound services as well too, it goes back to funding. It goes back to access. Let's say you have a family who, they are eligible for wraparound services, but they can't get to the counseling centers. Now you have a transportation issue.
What's at the core of a lack of providers that look like us? What's at the core, in your opinion?
In my opinion, it would be The support, I would say, well, in a lot of, well, I was fortunate to go to an HBCU for my undergrad and my grad, and then
Which
I went
one?
to a PWI,
Which one?
South Carolina State University.
Really?
Yes.
Where are you from?
South Carolina, Charleston.
I used to live in Walterboro. So
Okay,
so I know
okay.
all about
Yes, yes.
the soccer. I was actually
Yes.
going to go until something happened and I didn't go. But I was actually going to go. But okay, South Carolina State. All right.
Yes, yes, yes.
So where were you say you went to PWI? Which one?
Drexel University in Pennsylvania. When I was living there, I lived there for about 2 years, and that's where I got my doctorate from,
Okay.
education. So yeah.
Good old South Carolina State.
Yeah,
Good
yeah.
old South Carolina State. Okay.
Yeah.
So equity. What would make these things more equitable, particularly for our communities, to really have leverage in the mental health space? Because it predominantly racks our brains. Like we
Right.
really get ravaged by mental health, and like you said, for us it's more of a silent killer type thing because we're just taught not to really, especially guys, we're just
Yeah.
not taught to talk about our feeling things of that magnitude. So how do we remove that stigma and make it more equitable for us?
That's a
I know it's a very like. Okay, let me narrow that down. Let me bring that in a little bit. Let me bring that in a little bit. So, how do you feel like we could make these things more equitable? How do you execute that in your practice?
right. Education and collaborating with other organizations as well too. They might have a different focus, but we put mental health in there because we know how to draw. And I've worked with nonprofit organizations before, Fortune 500 companies before, to collaborate to bring the community in for not only the mental health piece, but the financial literacy piece, the workforce, like all of these things go together. And when you talk about equity, it's not just a one size fits all thing. There's so many things that impact the equity piece as well too. When you're talking about the financial piece and just basic financial literacy, taxes, how you budget, just things that individually, there's a lot of us who don't know how to do that.
Yeah,
You know,
we don't have checkbooks anymore. You know, people used to have to
Write
really be
checks.
accountable when you had checkbooks. It's like, well, I can write this check for 100, but it's gonna bounce because I know I only got 99.99 cents in his bank account. So you actually held accountable. I think having debit cards now is just kind of like, oh, I'll just
Swipe.
Yeah, I'll just swipe.
I'll pay the fee later.
Exactly. I'm just gonna swipe it because they're probably gonna pay it, and then they'll just
Right.
charge me for it, and by then I'll have the money. So I think that this debit card society has made us less accountable when it comes to our finances.
Right.
So yeah, there's that.
Yeah.
It's okay. So equitable.
There's a lot that goes into equitable because when you're talking about access as well too, when you're talking about resources, there's just a lot. It's a complex. I don't think there's of course there's not a one size fits all for that because there's so many moving parts. But what I will say is that providing that education, bringing that to the community. So whether you're in a college space, whether you're in a community space, talking about those things, and people want to know. They ask questions. Hey, what do I do in a crisis situation? Hey, I have a family member who's experiencing this. I had somebody ask me today, I think if there was a certain, like, what does that look like? The process of getting, mental health services. So even educating a person on what that looks like. Depending on your insurance, you may have a limited number of providers that you're looking for as well too. So it's a very, it's not cut and dry. It's very, sometimes it can be hard to navigate. But if you have someone who can kind of help you with that, what does that look like for me if I want to get services, not only for me, but now if you're bringing a family dynamic, I work with couples a lot as well too. So it just depends.
All right, so you were saying that you're in the grant writing space too. Well, God bless you, by the way, because it's like writing a dissertation. I'm good. What was the last grant y'all worked on, and what was it for? Just to give people an idea of what you can write a grant for.
Right. So the last one that we did was a mental health grant, and it was geared towards school-aged children. So really providing the mental health, because remember I said, mental health for children specifically is really hard.
When we say children, give me an age group.
I would say like your school age, middle, high school, maybe some elementary.
So probably like 7 to
about 18, okay. 20. Sometimes you can get 24 in there because technically, they can still be claimed by their parent. I think all the way up to age 26, if I'm not mistaken.
For insurance thing.
So, yeah. And then it just depends on what you're trying to do as well, too. But that's the last grant that we were working on. And I have another individual that I work with in doing that. So I don't take on all the
listen, those of you who want to write grants so bad, take a class on grant writing and see if you still feel the same after you've done.
I really would suggest that, to take a class on grant writing. There's a lot of moving parts, but what I will say, once you're able to identify your space, because there's a certain space that I stay in with grants as well too. So it doesn't have to be broad, but it can be, more focused and defined when you are searching for grants, depending on what you want to do.
Okay, because you're a wealth of knowledge today, so I just want to get all my questions out.
All right.
So what does it look like on the other side? Because this is the part people get confused and lost on. What happens when you receive the grant? Because they don't just give you this money and be like, okay, we're good, so you just take the money and just do the right thing. Mm-mm. That's not what that looks like. What does it look like on the other side of accepting a grant?
Right. On the other side, you have to account for every dime that you spend. Within grant writing, there's a budget process. So you have to lay out the budget. Where is this money going? And you have to also identify the key performance indicators, which are the KPIs. So basically, okay, we're going to use this grant money to do X, Y, and Z. So for example, we're going to use this money to provide students with maybe like transportation to get to and from where they need to go in terms of mental health classes. Let's say that's just an example. We're also going to provide maybe scholarships for some of these students to attend school. Then we may do some other workshops. So, of course, with the workshops, you got to lay out, well, what are these workshops specifically for? We're going to focus on anger management. We're going to focus on developing relationships, social skills, like whatever it is, you have to be specific about what you're using the money for. And I think people miss that part. Like, you have to be responsible.
Is there a rubric that they use, or is it like check-ins that the government expects you to give when you get this grant?
Typically, but it depends on the grant as well, too. So you have to read exactly what is it that they're looking for, because they'll tell you exactly what you need to provide to them, especially if it's federal funding.
What are some of the terms so that people get an idea? What are some of the terms they use that you see commonly?
Mm-hmm. In terms of
the rubric they're going to use, does it say like, okay, so every 2 months we're going to do this, or is it like you need to send a report every 6 weeks? Is that the kind of terminology they use, or is it something different?
Sometimes, sometimes they'll tell you, okay, we're going to give you this money for a year, so you have to build out what the program looks like for the year. So in the first 6 months, this is what we're going to do. And then the last 6 months, this is what we're going to do. And this is how it's going to look like. And this is how much money we're spending for the entire year. Sometimes they might want you to report, okay, the end of year, we need a report of what you've done. It might be 2 years. It could be, it just depends on whatever is written inside, the terminology that they use inside of the grant. That's why it's good to have someone who is a grant writer who kind of knows what to look for. Even sometimes when you write a grant, it has to, the way that you format it, if it's not formatted correctly, let's say they say, okay, this page has to have 500 words. You have 501. Okay, next.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So it's that specific?
It's that specific. We asked you for 500, not 501.
Wow. So they'll send it back?
So,
or they just want to approve it?
They just want to approve it.
Do you get a reason why they didn't approve a grant, or it's just like denied type thing?
It can be denied, and sometimes they may say, hey, you're not eligible this year, you might be eligible next year. Sometimes they might say, okay, you need to update certain things, or this piece was missing. So look, that's why you have to be very, like, it's not a joke. Like when we think about grant writing, oh, I'm just going to write this in. No. No. Especially for federal. Now, maybe some of the more like community grants and things like that, those might be a little bit easier, but you still have to be accountable for every penny that, you receive from those organizations.
So, I mean, do you need to get a new accountant? What are we talking about? Like, is it like...
Someone who can write grants and someone who can help you be accountable for the money as well, too. Like, where is it? Because you have to track that as well. They want to see that as well. So you have to make sure everything got to be very stringent with what you do. Mm-hmm.
Jesus.
Yeah. And some grants, they may not say, hey, you got to show us, but I know sometimes there may be some audits. So you got to make sure that whatever you say you're going to do with that money, that's what you need to do with the money.
Yeah, this is not a game, people. We talking about, the IRS showing up at your door with handcuffs and looking for you, and you can't go out the back window. This is not NCIS. You're not going out the back window. So you need to make sure that you understand what you're doing when you submit for these grants, especially if you get these grants. Mm-hmm. All right, let's shift into the workplace, because I know that you do D&I in the workplace. Yeah. What does that mean exactly? What does that mean?
That means, specifically with the mental health piece, how are you really? What is your experience in the workplace, especially as a person of color? Now, it's one thing, we talk about mental health, that's a blanket thing because we all have something. 1 in 5 of us have a mental health challenge. Anxiety and depression, ever since the pandemic, has shot up significantly. So I think people knew it was there, but now that the veil has been lifted because of the pandemic, you have a lot of people saying, yeah, I'm struggling with some things, whether it's feeling overwhelmed, whether it's overthinking, whether it's, anger, whether it's, and some people ask them, well, where is this coming from? It can be childhood traumas that they still carry into adulthood. It can be past relationships, past experiences. There's so many things. And when we talk about the workplace on top of that, you have people who might be carrying things from home who are in, certain spaces. There might be triggers. It's so many different things. Your bias, your microaggressions. It's happened to me. Oh, you look like a doctor today. Okay, well, what does a doctor look like? What I'm saying?
What I look like every other day.
Yeah, so it's little things like that further make the workplace very toxic and very you don't want to be in that space. Yeah. So it can look like different things. I've seen where people and we talk about this a lot too, where you have people who may not be as experienced but get promoted. So when we talk about
welcome to Georgia, because that happens all the time.
Equity, inclusion. If there's a decision being made, but you have certain people who are excluded from that, are we really including the people that this affects when we make decisions as well too? Whether we be supervisors, managers, so it's a space where really it could work and I find that more managements and more leaders, because to me, managers and leaders are different.
Yes, absolutely.
So I can have a manager who's a good leader, or I can have a manager or just a manager. That's
Lily,
it.
You just got promoted because you knew the right person.
Managing. However, leaders, I find, really include their people. Okay, even if it's a decision that leader doesn't have control of, they pull all their people in. Listen, this is what's happening. I just want you guys to know before, and this is what it's going to look like. That's whereas your manager, well, this is what y'all got to do. So
get it done.
And if you don't like it, then you can leave. Okay. And it's all about how the approach is. I can take the change, but it's sometimes the way you give it to me as an employee. And if I feel disrespected or I feel like, oh, well, they don't care, then what am I here for? So now you have people start to question their own mental health, their own purpose, their own worth in their position and in their role. And so now you're spiraling. If I make a mistake, what are they going to say? If I do a certain thing, if I take time off for my mental health, what does that look like? What's going to happen? And you have some organizations now who have the ERGs, which are the employee resource groups. And so they talk about, and it's just, like a committee within the organization that talk about the mental health, the DEI, different things that are maybe hindering the progress of the employees. What does that look like? Is this equitable? Am I being measured by the work that I do versus who I am? Mm. There's a lot there.
That's very true. I'm just trying to wrap my head around that one because, you think about workplaces like I'm 43. So old school was like you show up, you do your job, and you go home. Nobody cares about how you feel mentally.
Right.
This is a job.
Right.
You do that and you go home. If you want somebody to care, you get a career.
Right.
Because then they care when you have a career. But when it's just a job, we just kind of go through the motions and call it a day. So, what does that conversation feel like when you're not talking to a leader or a manager who has the ability to change that atmosphere? So how do you equip the average Joe who just works a job to be able to not fall apart every time they go to work?
Mm-hmm. And I know this might sound cliche, but it's true. Controlling what you can control. Something can happen, but I can still, at the end of the day, control how I feel about it. So if it gets to a point where I feel like this is something I can't handle, you might need to start looking for another job or another career. Or a lot of times, and that's why we talk about the coaching piece, transitioning into a different space. You might have to take a couple courses. You might have to get a certification or a license or something. I've had people who went from corporate and said, okay, well, I'm not going to do this anymore. Mm-hmm. Got certified as a nail tech, whatever, shifted out and have their own business, probably making more than they did in that corporate space.
It's very true.
I make my own schedule. I can focus on my own mental health, my self-care, my self-worth, everything else you want to talk about, and be happy doing it. So, and when we talk about the Great Recession as well, too, a lot of people, like I said, the veil had been lifted. So now it's, okay, well, I don't have to deal with this. I'm going to just walk away from it. And whatever happens, happens.
So when we talk about transition, what is the biggest hang up? Is it a mindset or is it when you do it? Like, What are you seeing? Are you seeing more of a mindset where people just kind of holding themselves back? Or is it really a holistic picture of things y'all have to really discuss to remove that roadblock?
It depends on the person's situation. So people who have more likely have family, children, things they have to take care of. I'm afraid to make this leap. What if I make a mistake? What if I, the what ifs. So the anxiety piece, thinking about the future of what if, thinking about, and some people get depressed because they're thinking about the past, what was. So now it's to get them to focus, okay, what is, what can be, but we have to look at it. If you don't feel like you want to quit your job, see if they have night classes. Figure out what this looks like you. So once again, it's about mapping the transition and what that looks like for the individual or for the person. If you're married, can your spouse support you while you support the household, while you pursue this goal? So we talk about all of that. What are your options? Don't feel limited because of where you are at this point right now. So it's really the mindset that has been the barrier.
Kind of figure that'd be the issue most of the time. Okay.
Yeah.
After the transition, because I think we kind of get people through things, but then we kind of just leave them after they're done. So what does a mindset look like after the transition? Okay, I've gotten out of corporate America. I'm now in this new space. How do I embrace what does happiness and joy and all that stuff look like? Like what is the after conversation?
Right. And we still continue with them. So we, instead of meeting more often, we might meet less often because now you're in the space, so you're getting acclimated to that. You're getting, you're in your different space, so you may not be sure how you feel at that moment. But we talk about that. Okay, now how do you feel about this? Are you happy you made the transition? Like, what are some concerns that you still have? So really staying with them to get an understanding of where they are. And a lot of people are happy in the process. Some people are still scared because they're like, okay, what if I fail? Yes, I'm here, but what if this doesn't work out? You still have options. If you want to go back into a workspace, you have skill set, you have the know-how, you have the experience. So you have options. Don't limit yourself to that. And once again, it goes back to the mindset. What do you think about yourself? What are your fears? It could be what we call irrational thoughts. The irrational always goes to the negative. I'm automatically assuming every time. But we as humans, we do that.
Absolutely.
What if I make a mistake? What if I fail? But to me, the word fail is the first attempt in learning something new. If I've never been in that space before and I don't fail, then what will I have learned from that situation? What am I gaining? So it's not just looking, yeah, okay, I didn't do that right, but I know next time that I need to do it this way. Your process looks different. Okay, this process didn't work. Trial and error. And it's just as if we were in a 9-to-5 job. We're still learning the job. It's still trial and error.
That's true. Is that conversation harder to have with someone that's slightly older? So let's say we talk about a factory worker who's now in their 40s and have done that for 40 years.
Right.
And now you're saying, well, they're being forced. They don't feel like it, but they're being forced because manufacturing is going away. Yeah. What does that conversation sound like? Or what does that feel like for them?
That can be a little bit of a struggle when you have someone who's forced, or if they feel forced, or if they feel they're not good with change. That happens a lot too, so that causes some anxiety, some depression. Like, now I've been doing this for 40 years, and now you tell me I have to change? Now, what does that look like? So now it's almost like panic mode. Like, I have no idea. This is the only skill set I have. I've done this for... So I let them have their time of getting everything out. And it's okay, because we all have that anxiety about something that we may have never done before.
So let me ask you this, in that space, how much anxiety is too much anxiety? Because apparently there's a normal level of anxiety that comes along just with making major decisions. How much is too much anxiety to the point where I need to really maybe be on medication? Like, how do I know how much is too much anxiety?
Yeah, to the point, like, if you have it like every day, and there's always something, like, you're always overthinking, you're always questioning your judgments, if, like, to the point where it's affecting your day-to-day, that's severe. And then there's different levels. It could be situational anxiety.
What is that?
In this situation, I get more anxious. I tend to overthink a little bit more than I would. For some people, it's like they're at work and they get anxious because I got to present something I don't like presenting. What if I mess up? What if I do da-da-da? That's a situation. But any other time, they're fine. But in that situation, there might be social anxiety. I can't be around too many people.
Yeah, I've seen those.
What do I say? What if something comes out and I sound like I don't know what I'm talking about? So situational, you have social, but if it's anxiety to the point where if something happens and you dwell on that thing to the point where it's like, I can't sleep, I'm having difficulty sleeping, falling asleep, staying asleep, I can't enjoy what I used to enjoy. If I'm watching TV and I'm still thinking about that thing that happened, that's when it becomes an issue, because now it's impacting your ability to focus, to concentrate. And sometimes we have that just as individuals, but when it gets to a point where it's affecting your day-to-day, that's a concern. That's when it's too much, and you may need, some people do the medication, some people manage it with exercise or eating better, getting out of. And for those who work from home, getting outside of the home, even if you don't like being around people, go for a walk. do something where you are in a different environment besides in your house.
That's my fear working from home. Something like I would go stir crazy working at home.
Yeah.
Like, I probably would never want to do anything, any work, because I'm like, the TV's right there in my room, the refrigerator's downstairs, and I'm probably not getting out of my robe. So I never figured how this would play out successfully for me. So that's why I've never pursued working from home, because it just doesn't seem ideal. What are some of the biggest issues you've seen in mental health since COVID? Like things we typically didn't see, we're seeing way more of now.
There is, I think I forgot the statistic, but I know compared to one person, just like you were talking about with the school, for every one counselor, it's like 400 children. It's like that now. For every individual, there might be, for every therapist, there's probably 1,000 plus people, who are looking for providers. And, and then when you talk about insurance and getting credentialed and all of that other stuff, like it's a process. So that I would say is the provider situation, and how many there are of us compared to, and you have some providers who have waiting lists because
I've heard that. Yeah,
there's in months, it takes months. So it's just a lot. I've seen like, I started, I've been doing this for 10 years. So when I started, you would get people here and there, you would get some consistent, and then you probably would see more people like the end of the year, holidays and things like that. But now it's like consistent. So I would say every day I might get about 5 to 6 referrals.
Really?
A day. Yes.
Wow.
And some I have to, depending on what the situation is, because I work with individuals who have anxiety, depression, some bipolar as well. I do the couples counseling as well too. So I have to be selective. Okay, that might be out of my scope of practice. So I have to refer back, out, because that's what's in the best interest of the client as well too. If that's not something I specialize in, then you need to see someone who has that specialization. So it's just, I get 6 probably a day on average.
Good grief. I mean, that's
new.
good.
Yeah, it's good.
It's good
It's
because
good.
at least people are seeking mental health, but it's not good because if we don't have enough providers, people are going to slip through the cracks.
Right. Yeah.
And that can be life or death.
Yeah. And it's a process. It can be a process. So I try to, when I get people, you have some people who are just so anxious, like, it took me forever to find you and da-da-da-da, and, or please don't, not see me because I tell them, well, right now I'm booked for the next 2 weeks. So, I'll wait. I'll take the next one. Okay. But if they're okay with that, then I'm okay with that. Some people are like, well, no, I need to see somebody like today. Just depends.
Like, this isn't McDonald's. Like, you can't just drive through a window and get a psychic talk while you drive through the window. Okay. Final thoughts. Anything you want to leave with the people in all the spaces we talked about today?
I would say don't limit yourself. I think a lot of us tend to have a mindset where we limit ourselves into these little boxes and these little spaces. If you have something going on, it is good to talk to someone. It's a non-judgmental space. It is different from talking to friends and family than talking to someone who is in mental health, because we are trained to identify, certain things, what's going on, how to process, and solution. I'm a solution-focused individual therapist as well, too. So we find solutions, real-world things that are practical that you can take with you from day to day and use it even after you are done with therapy. And there's nothing wrong with it. We all need somebody to talk to, and it's best to do that versus holding it in.
All right. So special thanks to our special guest today, Dr. Pia Scott. Thank you for being with us. Like I said, if I didn't learn nothing, that cover letter it's still harping on me. It's sitting on my shoulder right here. Just like, yeah. So you're going to do it when you get home? Not going to happen. No. But exactly, not going to happen. But, I appreciate, him showing up today and whatever case it may be. All right, you guys. So we will see y'all same time, same place on the next episode of Blend Blazers Podcast with your host, Ricardo D. Rice. All right. God. cover letter. Jesus.
Yeah,